Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast, Season 5, Episode 45. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion, where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. If you grew up in the state of Virginia, as I did, you know that Virginia has what's called an off-year election. They vote for a governor, they vote for a lieutenant governor, they vote for an attorney general in a year where there is no federal election. There are other elections around the country in different states, and these elections are often seen as a bellwether as to what may happen in the midterm elections that occur every 4 years. I don't know if you've been living under a rock, but the Democrats swept in these off-year elections in the state of Virginia, the state of Georgia, the state of New Jersey, and the state of New York. We're doing it all over again, aren't we? The political parties in power seem hell-bent on doing things that are so inopposite to anything that they promise to the people or anything that they stand for, if you can even say they stand for anything, that yes, we're only going to allow either party a majority in the House, the Senate, and to hold the White House for 2 years before we throw their asses out. Thank you to all my longtime listeners. If you're new to the podcast, please like, subscribe, thumbs up, 5-star, write a review, send to friends and enemies far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting.
Act 1. We're going to do it all over again, aren't we?
I frankly did not expect to be doing a piece on politics this week because there were so many other things that I wanted to talk about. I knew there were what they call off-year elections in a number of states, namely because I grew up in one of those states. So I'm familiar with the fact that the state of Virginia, the state of New Jersey in particular, have gubernatorial elections in what is called an off year. They're not every 2 to 4 years consistent with federal elections. They're in an off year where there are no federal elections. Again, only because I grew up in the state of Virginia did I hear over and over again how the state of Virginia and the state of New Jersey can be a bellwether as to what's going to happen in the midterm elections, because if Virginia goes red or Virginia goes blue, it's a good indication that a mere 12 months later, that very well could happen in the federal elections. Same thing with New Jersey. Throw in the fact that you also have a mayoral election in the city of New York. It is an indicator as to the mood or the temperature of that part of the country, at least, as to how people are feeling about the current state of the economy, the current state of the social order, of the political order. Another reason why I wasn't really paying attention is because I didn't really care. I thought these elections, even though many Democrats were favored in some of the races, I thought that they would be closer races. In other words, I didn't think that there would be a massive political statement made in these off-year elections. There was a massive political statement made in these off-year elections. Candidates that really had no business winning. Let's take the state of Virginia again, the state that I grew up in. The state of Virginia is unique that you vote for the governor of the state. You also vote for a lieutenant governor. The Democratic candidate for attorney general in the state of Virginia sent text messages to people that he never should have confided in, shouldn't have joked around with, basically saying that the Republican candidate for attorney general should be killed and so should his family. And the text didn't look jovial. The man looked like he was saying something in a fit of anger, but saying it seriously. These were leaked. It should have been damning to his cause. He wins. The elections on Tuesday were an utter repudiation of what the Trump administration is doing and what the Trump administration has done. And it just goes back to what I talk about on this podcast over and over again. The name of this podcast is This Is Why I Don't Vote. And you go out and you look and see what's going on in the world. And to the extent that people are voting, that they're not disgusted with the political system such that they're not even going to participate, instead of going and voting for someone, they're simply voting against someone else. It's so difficult for us as consumers to not look at something that's chosen by the masses and say it had to be better than this other thing because otherwise everybody wouldn't have chosen it, or at least a plurality of people wouldn't have chosen it. But in politics in particular, and it has to be said, even though Trump won the popular vote, looking at what Trump has done since he won the election, the man has only been in office for 11 months. Either he misread the mandate that was given to him by the American people, or he was only elected because people were not going to vote for Kamala Harris, or both. A quick recap about things that I've already talked about. You have a war between Israel and Hamas that, regardless of whether or not you think that it's justified, it's dragged on for way too long. The U.S. has spent a shit ton of money, and there doesn't seem to be any resolution in sight, even though people are saying, oh, well, there was a peace agreement that was reached. It seems, at least, no favoritism one way or the other, that both sides are violating that peace agreement. You have a war in Ukraine that is dragging on, that people are sick of seeing all of these dollars be poured into without any resolution. And as I've discussed on this podcast numerous times, for all intents and purposes, Russia has already won. They are already victorious. It's only how much territory now are they going to be able to capture in excess of the territory they already have, because the Ukrainians have basically run out of people. They don't have any more people to continue to fight such a destructive and draining conflict. You pass this new tax bill where you give a domestic law enforcement agency more money than the U.S. Marines, and you don't have any demonstrable change in immigration policy or in immigration posture, but for a bunch of people going and grabbing up women who are selling empanadas by the side of the road and throwing them into detention centers in Florida. Let me posit this question to you, dear listener, because maybe I missed it. How many firefights, exchanges of rifle rounds has ICE been involved in since they've taken this new aggressive posture against this criminal, this drug element, these cartels in our country? How many news stories have you seen where these ICE agents get all kitted up, they've got all of the most advanced equipment available to any military, the weaponry, the vehicles? How many firefights have you seen them get into with this lawless cartel element that absolutely refuses to be taken alive? By my watch, that count is zero. There have been 0 incidents where ICE has had to exchange gunfire with lawless elements within the four corners domestic United States of America. Have ICE officers shot people? Yes, they have. Have those people been carrying weapons or exchanged gunfire with them? No, they haven't. I'll say something that might be controversial. That's why I have this podcast. I don't think people in this country really mind a little totalitarianism. If Trump were able to come in and demonstrably change the way people feel about the economy, prices come down on gas, on groceries, housing is a little bit more affordable. The tax bill provides some instant relief to at least certain segments of the population outside of the ultra wealthy. Families have a little bit more extra money to spend on entertainment. Those that will are able to save. Not a week ago, I saw one of these Trump sycophants get on the television and start pointing to data, to statistics, to argue that the economy is getting so much better than it was under Joe Biden. If you recall, dear listener, that was a Biden stunt. In fact, his administration perfected that stunt. He'd have any clown in his administration come out with an easel and one of these big graphs and show, hey, look at this line, it's going up. The economy's getting better. Look at this data, it's going down. The economy's getting better. Whatever they could argue to the American people to change this perception that the economy was in terrible shape. Well, the fact of the matter is inflation was sky high. Interest rates were sky high. There were no solutions proposed by the administration for things like groceries, things like housing. When you add in all these terrible job numbers that have occurred over the course of the last 90 to 120 days, people not only not working, but there are apparently a lot of underemployed people, no one is going to tolerate any level of totalitarianism or U.S. dollars being sent abroad when they feel like the material conditions that affect their lives on a day-to-day basis are not getting better, they're getting worse. I try to be honest with you. I try to be honest with this limited consuming public that I have for this podcast. I voted for Trump. There was no way in hell I was going to vote for Kamala Harris. They're not going to be able to take somebody off the bench because they refused as a Democratic Party to have any real convention, have any real primary. And as many things annoy me about Donald Trump, he did have a good run for the first few years in his first administration with respect to the economy. I'm not going to blame Donald Trump because of COVID. I don't care what anybody else says. No matter the leader, it's basically like giving them a series of terrible choices and they have to pick the least terrible choice out of all of those terrible choices. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But the fact of the matter was, he had a good run in his first administration with respect to the economy. At the very least, maybe I have a couple more nickels to rub together in my pocket. Nope. Trump hasn't done anything to help reduce inflation. He's gotten into a spat with his Federal Reserve, but they haven't really lowered interest rates because they're still concerned about inflation. And to be clear, as I've said on this podcast over and over again, yes, inflation may be part of the problem, but the fact that these corporations are gouging us as consumers, this greedflation, they feel like they can jack their prices up and just blame it on inflation, and there is no regulatory oversight to address this whatsoever. To be fair, Biden didn't do anything about it. Harris didn't seem to have a plan to do anything about it, but we threw their asses out of office because of it. So there's no excuse to be made, oh, the Biden administration is at fault. They're not in power anymore. Republican House, Republican Senate, Republican President. Got to get some W's. Got to get some W's in that situation. We're going to do it all over again, aren't we? I've had several segments where I talked about the fact that an administration was able to get what any administration wants. If you're a Republican, you've got a Republican House, a Republican Senate, you're able to get the things that you want passed. If you're a Democrat, you have a Democratic House, you have a Democratic Senate, you are able to get the things that you want passed. These political parties are so fucking inept that in each and every one of these circumstances, they were only able to keep that supermajority for 2 years. 2 short years, because they're so greedy and their vision is so short term that they are not even able to accomplish a modicum of legislative initiatives to help the everyday working person. Slick Willie had it back in the 90s. And the first time the Republicans were able to take the House back after 30 years was during his reign of terror when the Democrats had the House, the Senate, and the White House. Fast forward to George W. Bush. Pure Republican superiority. A couple of wars and a recession later, and here come the Democrats. And he's a lame duck. Well, we're going to change things. And you want to know what kind of change? Hope and change. Here comes Barry. Barry has 2 years. Obamacare, which is basically an old Republican plan that they wouldn't even really take credit for anymore. That's the best that Barry could do. And he couldn't even get abortion protected legislatively in that bill. His famous lines being, hey, it's not that big a priority. Again, I don't care how you fall on the abortion, anti-abortion spectrum. It doesn't matter. The Democrats are routinely pro-abortion, and they had the White House, and they had the Senate, and they had the House of Representatives, and they weren't able to get anything done. Boom. Barry loses that power. Lame duck. Did Donald J. Trump have a Republican House and a Republican Senate for his entire first administration? No, he did not. I also did a podcast segment where I believe that Trump looks at the world and he says, I don't know if these people are ever going to get along, but if we all do business together and we all make money together, that will at least create some tie that will allow us to negotiate and to keep a level of peacefulness, because just like warring mafia families, there's only so much that you will tolerate in violence if it affects the bottom line, if it affects business, if it affects profitability. Digital currency has become a complete and total grift, and Trump has participated in this, and he has enjoyed significant wealth because of it. It doesn't compel me enough to do an entire segment or entire podcast episode on the fact that Trump's net worth went up billions, more than one. I've read some estimates that it's potentially up to $5 billion, and most of that is in cryptocurrency. He went from questioning cryptocurrency, not really believing in it, to taking ungodly sums of money from these crypto fucktards and now becoming a crypto billionaire. Would the American people in general begrudge him the opportunity to do so? He's not the first president to walk into that office, and before you know it, he's a multimillionaire, if not a billionaire. But there's only so much that the people will tolerate if they see their material conditions getting worse and worse, if their leaders' material conditions somehow, amazingly, get better and better and better. The last point that I'm going to make is the tenor of what these Democrats ran on and how that might change the way elections, the way politics operates for at least the next 8 to 10 years. I can't make this prediction that it's going to change forever, but when you see someone who is clearly a democratic socialist, to call him a communist is just fucking stupid. It's just so rhetorical. It may work on baby boomers, but there are only so many baby boomers. When you see someone like Mamdani in New York come out and win that election, and you see this flood of young people come out for him, he's clearly a democratic socialist. You think calling him a communist is going to be somehow dispositive in the election. Can't remember the woman's name in New Jersey, but as her campaign progressed, and she came out of nowhere, I believe there were people who were making fun of her as recently as July as to how far back she was in the polls in that election. And then she started on more of a progressive populist rant or rhetoric with regard to, and I believe I'm correct, it didn't just happen in New York City. She was also in New Jersey on this rant about how there was going to have to be price freezing because landlords were basically conspiring. It was a monopoly, and they were all trying to aggressively increase the rental rates in practically every city in the state. You really didn't have to have but so much progressive rhetoric in the state of Virginia. There's a ton of federal employees in the state of Virginia. I don't think that the government shutdown did the Republicans any good in the state of Virginia. The point being, I don't care where you fall on the political spectrum or whether or not you think any of these progressive or socialist policies would ever work. We can have that debate. P.S. I don't think they're going to work. That's not the issue. It's that people are open to those ideas because all of the ideas that are being offered by these dyed-in-the-wool Democrats, the ideas from these neocon Republicans, they're falling on deaf ears now. People are ready for something new. Donald Trump was that something new, and he hasn't come through. People are rarely ever open to socialist ideas simply because they're good ideas. It's because they've seen all of the other ideas be put into practice, or at least people have argued they're going to put them into practice, and they do the same old shit that everybody else did, all of their predecessors did, so it was just lies. But they see that these socialists, they actually mean it. They're going to try it. That being the case, and a lot of progressive Democrats seeing that that actually works, I don't think that you're just going to see a Democratic sweep in 2026. They're going to take back the House and they may even take back the Senate. What you may see is a lot of these old school centrist Democrats, these Democrats that were more than happy to turn away from labor when they saw all those corporate dollars that they had exposure to if they would just change their tune. This could very well be the beginning of the revolution in the Democratic Party, where they are turning away from all their corporate overlords, all their crypto overlords, all their Silicon Valley overlords. which, by the way, are the same overlords of the Republican Party, and you have these newer, younger, progressive members offering what is a radical ideology, radical change, and a lot of people are going to be open to that. In a roundabout way, Donald Trump may be making over the Democratic Party, for better or for worse, for the Democrats and for the rest of us. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.